The crystal glasses clinked with forced cheer as Marcus Bennett raised his flute, commanding attention like he commanded everything else in his life. His steel-gray eyes swept across our dining room, landing on each face with calculated precision. I watched him from my seat, noting how even his smile seemed measured, portioned out like shares in a hostile takeover. "To new beginnings and profitable partnerships," he announced, his voice carrying that particular tone that successful men use when they know they've already won. My father's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his own glass. I'd never seen him like this before. Peter Morgan, the man who built houses with his bare hands, looking like he might crumble under the weight of a champagne flute. "I'm Tessa," and this was the moment I realized something was terribly wrong with my family. "The merger will benefit everyone," Marcus continued, placing his free hand on my father's shoulder. The gesture looked friendly enough, but I caught the slight dig of his fingers into the fabric of Dad's suit jacket. "Your expertise in construction, combined with Bennett Development's resources, it's a natural fit, Peter." My mother Linda beamed from her end of the table, blissfully unaware of the predatory undertones. She'd spent 3 days preparing this dinner, convinced that having the Bennetts over would somehow elevate our social standing. If she only knew. "I still need time to consider the details," my father said, his voice carrying none of its usual confidence. Marcus's son Ryan caught my eye across the table and quickly looked away. He was handsome in that privileged way that came from never having to worry about anything, but something in his expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Time?" Marcus's laugh could have frozen hell. "Peter, in this market, time is a luxury you can't afford. My offer is more than generous, considering the circumstances." I watched my father's face pale slightly. "What circumstances would those be, Marcus?" "Dad," Ryan interrupted, "maybe we should discuss business another time? Mrs. Morgan's roast is getting cold." But Marcus waved him off like an irritating fly. "The circumstances of your loans coming due, Peter. The circumstances of your outdated equipment and aging workforce. The circumstances of that lawsuit from the Henderson project." My fork clattered against my plate. This was the first I'd heard of any lawsuit. "Marcus," my father's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper, "not here, not in front of our families." "Why not? They'll find out soon enough when I buy your company for pennies on the dollar." Marcus stood, straightening his perfectly tailored jacket. "You have until the end of the week, Peter. After that, I'll have to pursue other options." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's smile had finally cracked, revealing the confusion beneath. Ryan looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Emma Bennett, Marcus's wife, simply sipped her wine with practiced indifference. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. "Mr. Bennett, I believe you've overstayed your welcome." Marcus turned to me, really seeing me, for the first time that evening. His smile shifted into something more calculating. "Ah, the psychology graduate. Tell me, Tessa, what does your degree tell you about survival of the fittest in the business world?" "It tells me predators eventually face extinction," I replied, matching his tone. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Charming. Peter, you should teach your daughter about respect. It might serve her better than idealism in the long run." As the Bennetts filed out of our dining room, I caught Ryan glancing back at me. There was something like apology in his expression, mixed with something else I couldn't quite read. My father remained seated, staring at his untouched plate. The proud shoulders that had carried me as a child now seemed to bear the weight of an impossible choice. "Dad," I started, but he cut me off. "Not now, Tessa. Please." I watched him push away from the table and retreat to his study, leaving behind the ruins of our family dinner and the first tremors of what would become an earthquake in our lives. Looking at my mother's tears and the half-empty wine glasses, I made a silent promise. Marcus Bennett would regret the day he threatened my family. I just didn't know yet how deep that promise would take me. 3 days after the disastrous dinner, I stood outside my father's office, watching him through the dusty window. The construction yard behind him was eerily quiet. No workers, no machinery, just rows of idle equipment gathering rust under the afternoon sun. My hand hesitated on the door handle. The last time I'd tried talking to him, he'd shut me down with that stern look I hadn't seen since my rebellious teenage years. But this time I had ammunition. "The Henderson lawsuit isn't real," I said, dropping the stack of courthouse records on his desk. "I checked every filing from the past 5 years. Nothing." Dad didn't look up from his paperwork. "You shouldn't be investigating my business affairs." "Someone has to. You're certainly not telling us anything." His pen stopped moving. The silence between us filled with 28 years of stubbornness. His and mine, mirror images of each other. "Marcus Bennett is lying," I pressed on. "He's making up problems to force your hand." "Why?" "Because that's what men like Marcus do." He finally looked up, eyes tired. "They create problems, then present themselves as the solution. Then fight back. You built this company from nothing. And I can lose it just as fast." He stood up, walking to the window. "The lawsuit might be fake, but the loans are very real. The bank's calling them in early. They can't do that. They can when Marcus Bennett sits on their board of directors." The pieces clicked into place. I felt sick. He planned this. How long has he been setting this up? Does it matter? Dad turned back to me, and for the first time I saw defeat in his posture. "Even if I fight the bank, he'll find another way. Men like Marcus always do." My phone buzzed. A text from Grace Thompson, my best friend and newly minted lawyer. "Found something. Meet me ASAP." "I have to go," I said, gathering my papers. "But this isn't over." "Tessa." His voice stopped me at the door. "Leave it alone, please. Your mother, she can't handle losing everything." "That's exactly why I can't leave it alone." Grace was waiting at our usual coffee spot, surrounded by legal documents and wearing her "I found dirt" smile. "Bennett Development isn't just buying your dad's company," she said without preamble. "They're buying up the entire neighborhood. Look." She spread out property records across the table. Names I recognized. The Hendersons, the Patels, old Mrs. Rodriguez, all with pending sales to shell companies. "They're using different company names to hide the pattern," Grace explained, "but they all trace back to Bennett Development." "He's destroying our community piece by piece," I muttered, scanning the documents. "Why?" "Luxury condos." Grace pulled up a rendering on her tablet. "The whole area's getting rezoned. Your dad's company is just one piece of the puzzle." I stared at the sleek glass towers that would replace my childhood home. "We have to stop this." "How?" "Everything they're doing is technically legal." My phone buzzed again. An unknown number. The text made my blood run cold. "We should talk." Ryan Bennett. "Maybe we fight fire with fire," I said, showing Grace the message. She grabbed my wrist. "Tessa, don't. Getting involved with Ryan Bennett is like playing with matches in a gasoline factory." "Good. I'm ready to watch something burn." I typed back, "When and where?" Ryan's response came immediately. "Tonight. The Blue Room, 8 p.m. Grace was still shaking her head. "Your father asked you to stay out of this." "My father asked me to protect my mother," I corrected, standing up. "And sometimes protection means going to war." "Just be careful," Grace called after me. "The Bennetts play for keeps." Walking home, I passed the old playground where I'd spent countless summers. A "coming soon" sign already marked its future demolition. Marcus Bennett wasn't just threatening my family's livelihood, he was erasing our history. Tonight, I'd find out if his son could be turned into an ally, or if he was just another weapon in Marcus's arsenal. Either way, I was done playing defense. If Marcus Bennett wanted a war, I'd give him one he wouldn't forget. My phone buzzed one last time. Ryan again. "Come alone. My father can't know about this." I smiled grimly. The game was changing, and for once I had a card to play. The Blue Room lived up to its name, casting everything in an ethereal glow that made even the truth feel fluid. Ryan Bennett sat at the corner booth, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on his whiskey glass. He looked different here, away from his father's shadow, less polished, more human. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, as I slid into the seat across from him. "I wasn't sure you'd show." I kept my coat on, ready to leave at the first sign of manipulation. "Why did you want to meet?" Before he could answer, A familiar voice cut through the ambient jazz. Perfect timing. Marcus Bennett emerged from the shadows like a demon summoned by his name, sliding into the booth beside his son. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. "Ryan," I said, my voice sharp with betrayal, "I thought—" "He did what he was told," Marcus interrupted, "for once." He placed a manila envelope on the table between us. "Your father's loan documents, the bank's foreclosure notice, and a solution to everyone's problems." I didn't touch the envelope. "I don't make deals with people who threaten my family." "No?" Marcus smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "Then why are you here?" "Dad," Ryan started, but Marcus silenced him with a look. "My son needs direction, structure, a reason to finally grow up." Marcus's eyes fixed on me like a sniper's scope. "You need to save your father's legacy. I'm offering a mutually beneficial arrangement." The pieces clicked into place. "You want me to marry Ryan?" "Smart girl." Marcus pushed the envelope closer. "Say yes, and all these problems disappear. Your father keeps his company, your mother keeps her home, and your charming little neighborhood stays exactly as it is." Ryan wouldn't meet my eyes. His fingers had stopped drumming, frozen mid-beat. "And if I say no?" Marcus shrugged, the gesture almost elegant in its cruelty. "Then I destroy everything your father built, piece by piece. The bank forecloses next week. The rezoning approval comes through the week after that. By Christmas, there won't be anything left of the Morgan name worth saving." My hands clenched under the table. "You're a monster." "I'm a businessman. One who's offering you a very generous opportunity." He stood, straightening his perfect suit. "You have until tomorrow night to decide. Ryan will handle the details if you accept." After Marcus left, the silence between Ryan and me grew thick enough to choke on. "Did you know?" I finally asked. "When you texted me?" "Yes." At least he had the decency to look ashamed. "He's been planning this for months. The loans, the rezoning, all of it." "Why me?" Ryan laughed, hollow and bitter. "Because you're everything I'm not. Driven, principled. The perfect influence to fix his disappointment of a son." He drained his whiskey. "Plus, your father's company has the contracts he needs for the development. It's a neat solution to all his problems." "Except mine." I stood up, my legs shaking. "Tell your father he can go to hell." "Tessa, wait." Ryan caught my arm. "You don't understand what he's capable of. He'll destroy everything." I yanked free. "Then I'll destroy him first." But walking home through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, past the houses and shops that had shaped my childhood, doubt crept in like evening shadows. I thought of my father's defeated expression, my mother's oblivious happiness, the families who would lose everything when Marcus Bennett's bulldozers rolled in. My phone buzzed, Grace calling to check on me. I ignored it. Another text from Ryan. "I'm sorry, but he always wins." Standing outside my parents' house, I watched through the window as they sat together on the couch, my mother leaning against my father's shoulder as they watched TV. They looked peaceful, unaware that their world was about to shatter. I pulled out my phone and typed a response to Ryan. "Tell your father I want everything in writing, and one condition of my own." The reply came instantly. "Name it." "I want proof that every family in this neighborhood gets fair compensation and relocation assistance. Every single one." 3 dots appeared, disappeared then. "Done. Welcome to the family." I walked inside, carrying the weight of my decision like armor. Sometimes revenge meant playing the long game. Sometimes it meant saying yes when everything in you screamed no. And sometimes it meant marrying the devil's son to save your father's soul. The engagement party felt like a carefully orchestrated performance, with Marcus Bennett as the proud director. Every smile was measured, every toast rehearsed. I stood beside Ryan in the Bennett mansion's grand ballroom, both of us playing our parts to perfection. "You two make such a lovely couple," Emma Bennett said, her voice carrying a note I couldn't quite read. She touched my arm, her fingers ice cold despite the warmth of the room. "Though I must admit, it all seems rather sudden." Ryan's hand tightened on my waist. "When you know, right, darling?" I forced a smile, wondering if his words carried as much irony for him as they did for me. Absolutely. Emma's eyes flickered between us, sharp and knowing. Indeed. Ryan, dear, would you fetch me a fresh drink? I'd love a moment with my future daughter-in-law. Once Ryan was gone, Emma's pleasant mask slipped. I know what my husband is doing. I don't know what you mean. Please. She led me to a quiet corner, her voice dropping. Marcus has been trying to control Ryan's life since birth. This marriage is just another chain. She paused, studying me. But you're not what he expected, are you? Before I could respond, Marcus's voice boomed through the room. If I could have everyone's attention! He stood on the stairs, commanding the crowd like a king addressing his subjects. Ryan returned, positioning himself beside me, his posture stiff. Today we celebrate not just love, but legacy, Marcus continued. The joining of two families, two businesses, two futures. He raised his glass. To Ryan and Tessa, may their union bring everything we've hoped for. The crowd applauded, but I caught Grace's worried expression from across the room. She'd been against this from the start, calling it a deal with the devil. I need air, I muttered, slipping away from Ryan and the suffocating pleasantries. I found myself in Marcus's study, drawn to the architectural plans spread across his desk. The familiar streets of my neighborhood were marked with red lines, demolition zones. But something was different from the plans Grace had shown me. These were dated earlier, much earlier. Fascinating reading? I spun around. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. These plans are from 6 months ago, I said. Before the loans, before everything. You've been planning this all along. Business requires foresight. He closed the door behind him. Just like marriage. This isn't marriage, it's extortion. No. He moved closer, his voice dropping. It's evolution. The weak adapt or die. Your father chose not to adapt. You engineered his failure. I created an opportunity for all of us. He smiled, cold and calculating. Including you, Tessa. You think you're sacrificing yourself for your family? Look deeper. This arrangement gives you power, influence, a chance to make real change. By destroying my community, by rebuilding it, better, stronger. He gestured to the plans. You could be part of that vision, or you could remain an obstacle to be removed. The threat hung in the air between us. Through the door, I heard Ryan's voice, searching for me. Think about it, Marcus said, turning to leave. You're not just marrying my son, you're joining an empire. After he left, I stayed frozen, staring at the plans. A shadow fell across the desk. Ryan. I heard everything, he said quietly. Did you know? About the timeline? No. He moved beside me, his fingers tracing the red lines on the plans. But I'm not surprised. Nothing happens in my father's world without careful orchestration. He paused. Including us. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. Behind the practiced charm, I saw something familiar. The same trapped expression I saw in my own mirror every morning. I found something else, he said, pulling out his phone. Records of similar developments in other cities. The pattern's always the same. Manufactured crises, forced sales, destroyed communities. He met my eyes. We could stop him. We? I'm tired of being his puppet. Ryan's voice hardened. Help me bring him down, and I'll help you save your neighborhood. The party continued beyond the study walls, voices and music mixing into a distant hum. I thought of Emma's warning, of Grace's concern, of my father's defeat. How do I know I can trust you? Ryan's laugh was bitter. You can't, but right now, we're all each other has. He held out his hand, offering not romance but alliance. I took it, sealing a different kind of engagement, one built on revenge rather than love. The game had changed, and so had the players. The cathedral-stained glass cast fractured rainbows across my wedding dress as I stared at my reflection. 300 guests waited in the nave, all here to witness what they thought was a fairy tale merger of two powerful families. You don't have to do this. Grace adjusted my veil, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. we could still find another way. There is no other way. I touched the pearl necklace my mother had given me, her own mother's before that. Not if I want to save everyone. The door opened, and Emma Bennett slipped in, elegant in midnight blue. 5 minutes. She paused, studying me. Marcus wants a word before the ceremony. Grace stepped between us. Absolutely not. It's fine, I said, though nothing was fine. Give us a moment. Once alone with Emma, I braced for another warning, but she surprised me by pressing a small USB drive into my palm. Security footage from Marcus's private office, last week's meeting with the zoning board. My fingers closed around it. Why? Because my husband destroyed my family to build his empire. I won't watch him destroy yours too. She turned to leave, then stopped. But be careful. Marcus suspects Ryan isn't as loyal as he appears. The drive felt like it was burning through my palm. I slipped it into my garter, mind racing with possibilities. My father knocked softly, entering with red-rimmed eyes. Ready, sweetheart? Dad? The words caught in my throat. How could I tell him this wedding was a sham, that his future son-in-law was plotting against his own father? I know something's wrong, he said quietly. I'm not blind, Tessa. Whatever's happening, whatever you're trying to protect me from, you don't have to carry it alone. The organ began playing, its notes echoing like a funeral dirge. We need to go, I whispered, taking his arm. The walk down the aisle felt endless. Ryan waited at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, wearing the same mask of contentment I'd practiced all month. Marcus stood in the front row, surveying his masterpiece with satisfaction. But halfway down the aisle, Ryan's expression changed. Something flickered in his eyes. Warning or fear, I couldn't tell. He glanced at his father, then back at me, giving an almost imperceptible shake of his head. My steps faltered. Steady, my father whispered, tightening his grip on my arm. We reached the altar and Ryan took my hand. His palm was sweating. Don't trust anything, he murmured as we turned to face the priest. Not even me. The ceremony blurred past until we reached the vows. Ryan spoke his with practiced precision, but I heard the tremor in his voice that no one else seemed to notice. When my turn came, I opened my mouth to speak, and caught movement in my peripheral vision. Marcus was checking his phone, his face darkening with rage. The words stuck in my throat as Marcus stood abruptly, motioning to someone in the back of the church. Ryan's hand tightened on mine painfully. Say it, he hissed. Now. But I saw them now. Men in dark suits moving through the side aisles, their intent clear in their stance. Whatever game Ryan and I thought we were playing, Marcus had already won. I do, I forced out, the words tasting like ash. The priest pronounced us married just as one of Marcus's men reached him, whispering something urgent. Marcus's expression shifted from rage to cold satisfaction. As we turned to face the congregation, Ryan pulled me close, his lips brushing my ear. He found the evidence we planted. All of it. What? I'm sorry. His voice cracked. He gave me a choice. Betray you, or watch him destroy everything. I chose. The recessional music started, drowning out my response. We walked back down the aisle, smiling, waving, the perfect newlyweds. My father beamed proudly. My mother wiped away tears of joy. Only Emma's face showed understanding as we passed her pew. She touched her throat, where her own wedding pearls lay, and I saw decades of silent survival in her eyes. The USB drive pressed against my thigh like a brand, now useless, probably planted with false evidence that would only incriminate me further. As we reached the church doors, Ryan squeezed my hand. Comfort or warning or threat, I no longer knew which. The sunshine hit us like a spotlight, and cameras flashed, capturing the moment for posterity. I smiled broader, gripping Ryan's hand until my knuckles went white. If this was war, then let it be war. Marcus Bennett had taught me well. Sometimes the best revenge starts with saying, I do. The demolition notice appeared on Mrs. Rodriguez's door exactly 1 month after my wedding. I stood on her porch, watching her arthritis-gnarled fingers trace the official letterhead, while her granddaughter translated the legal jargon into Spanish. 30 days, she whispered, looking up at me with betrayal in her eyes. Your new father-in-law gives us 30 days to leave our home of 40 years. My phone buzzed. Another message from Ryan. I'd been ignoring them since discovering his betrayal at the wedding. The screen showed 15 missed calls, all from him. I'll fix this, I promised, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Walking down the street, I saw similar notices on every door. The neighborhood that had raised me was being sentenced to death, and I wore the executioner's ring on my finger. Grace met me at her office, spreading documents across her desk. Marcus moved faster than we expected. The zoning board approved everything yesterday. How? The community meeting isn't for another week. Emergency session. She pulled up an email. Apparently there are urgent public safety concerns about the structural integrity of these buildings. My father's buildings? The irony twisted like a knife. He built half this neighborhood himself. Speaking of your father, Grace hesitated. He's in the hospital. Mild heart attack. Your mother called while you were out. The room tilted sideways. I grabbed the desk to steady myself. He's stable, Grace added quickly. But Tessa, this has to end. My phone buzzed again. Ryan. This time I answered. Stop calling me. Meet me at the studio, he said, his voice urgent. I can explain everything. Like how you set me up. Fed me false information to keep me distracted while your father... Please. It's about your father's hospital bills. I froze. What about them? Just come. Alone. Ryan's art studio sat above an old warehouse, one of the few buildings Marcus didn't own. Inside, canvases lined the walls, not landscapes or abstracts, but detailed portraits of our neighborhood. Mrs. Rodriguez tending her roses, the local kids playing basketball, my father supervising a construction site. You've been documenting everything, I realized. For months. Ryan emerged from the shadows, looking haunted. Every person, every story, every building Marcus plans to destroy. Why? Because art reveals truth. And the truth is, my father's empire is built on ruins. He pulled out a folder, including these. Inside were hospital bills, astronomical numbers that made my stomach clench. Marcus arranged for your father to be treated at a private facility, Ryan explained. The best care possible, all expenses covered, a gesture of goodwill from a concerned in-law. You mean leverage. If you fight the development, these bills become your problem, along with the original loans, the business debts, everything. I sank onto a paint-splattered stool, the weight of it all crushing down. He really thinks of everything, doesn't he? Not everything. Ryan pulled out another folder. Remember that USB drive my mother gave you? The one I helped my father discredit? It wasn't the only copy. Hope flickered, then died. It doesn't matter. He'll just bury any evidence like he always does. Not if we don't give him time to react. Ryan gestured to his paintings. Next week's community meeting, I'm turning it into an art exhibition. Every portrait, every story, projected onto the buildings he wants to tear down, along with evidence of every deal he's ever manipulated. He'll destroy you. He already has. Ryan's laugh was bitter. But maybe that's the price of redemption. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Dad asking for you. Please come. I have to go, I said, standing. Tessa. Ryan caught my arm. I know I betrayed you, but this time I'm choosing the right side. Help me take him down. I looked at the paintings, at the faces of my neighbors captured in careful brushstrokes, at my father's proud smile, preserved in oils and canvas, then at the hospital bills that could destroy everything. When's the exhibition? Tomorrow night. No announcements, no warnings, just truth, splashed across every wall he wants to tear down. I thought of Mrs. Rodriguez's trembling hands, my father's hospital bed, Marcus's smug victory at my wedding. Then we better make it count, I said, because we'll only get one shot. Ryan nodded, understanding the real meaning. If we failed, Marcus wouldn't just destroy our neighborhood, he'd destroy us all. The projectors hummed to life as dusk settled over the neighborhood. Ryan's paintings bloomed across the condemned buildings' facades, faces of defiance 30 feet tall. News vans lined the streets, their cameras already rolling. Marcus's sleek car pulled up just as planned. He stepped out, his practiced smile faltering at the sight of the gathering crowd. I watched from the shadows as he spotted the first image, himself, captured in harsh brushstrokes, signing demolition orders with a predator's grin. "What is this?" he demanded, phone already in hand. "Your legacy." I emerged from the darkness, Grace beside me with a tablet displaying livestream numbers. Every deal, every threat, every life you've destroyed, all of it documented and streaming live across the city. His eyes narrowed, scanning the crowd. "Where's my son?" Ryan appeared on the warehouse roof, spotlit against the evening sky. More paintings unfurled behind him, a cascade of evidence transformed into art. "It's over, Dad," Ryan called down. "The zoning board is watching. Your investors are watching. Everyone is watching." Marcus's laugh was razor sharp. "You think pretty pictures can stop progress? I own this neighborhood." "Not anymore." Emma stepped forward, her elegant figure drawing all eyes. "The board of directors received some interesting documentation this morning about certain creative accounting practices." "You wouldn't dare." Marcus's voice dropped dangerously. "Everything you have is because of me." "Everything I lost was because of you," Emma corrected, "including my son's respect." I moved closer, keeping my voice low. "Here's what happens next. You'll cancel the development, release my father's company from all obligations. And those hospital bills you're holding over us? Consider them your parting gift." "Or what?" He stepped into my space, towering over me. "You'll ruin me? With paintings and paperwork?" His smile turned cruel. "You forget, dear daughter-in-law, I still own your father's debt. One phone call and—" "Make it," Ryan interrupted, now standing beside me. "Show everyone exactly who you are." "Who?" Marcus reached for his phone, but froze as new images splashed across the buildings. Security footage from his office showing every backroom deal, every threat, every moment of corruption captured in high definition. "The USB drive was a decoy," I explained. "The real evidence was in your private server. Emma gave us access months ago." "You helped them?" Marcus turned on his wife, mask finally cracking. "After everything I've given you?" "You gave me a prison," Emma replied calmly. "I'm giving our son his freedom." The crowd had grown, phones recording everything. I recognized faces from the neighborhood, from my father's company, from Marcus's own board of directors, all witnesses to his unraveling. Marcus's hand shot out, grabbing my arm. "I will burn everything you love to the ground." "No," Ryan stepped between us. "You'll walk away, because if you don't, these files go to the SEC, the FBI, every agency you've been bribing for years." "You would destroy your own family name?" "You already did that, Dad. I'm just making it public." For a moment, I saw something crack in Marcus's expression. Not defeat, but recognition. He looked at Ryan like he was seeing him for the first time. "You really have become ruthless," he said softly. "Maybe I taught you something after all." "You taught me what not to be." Marcus straightened his jacket, dignity wrapping around him like armor. "You'll regret this, both of you." "Maybe," I agreed, "but at least we'll regret it on our own terms." He turned to leave, then paused. "The hospital bills are paid. Consider it a wedding gift." His smile was pure venom. After all, family is forever. We watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing into the night. The crowd erupted in cheers, but I felt hollow. Victory tasted like ashes. "It's not over," Ryan said, reading my expression. "He'll find another way to fight back." "I know." I looked up at the projected images, at the faces of our community glowing against the darkness. "But next time, we'll be ready." Grace approached with her tablet. "The board's calling an emergency meeting. Marcus's position is already being questioned." "And the development?" "Suspended, pending investigation." I nodded, feeling the weight of the past months finally lifting. The neighborhood was safe, for now. My father's company would survive. But as I watched Ryan stare after his father's car, I realized some victories come with their own kind of defeat. Was it worth it? I asked him quietly. Ask me tomorrow, he replied, taking my hand as we faced our uncertain future together. The demolition notice still hung on Mrs. Rodriguez's door, but now it was just paper. I helped her tear it down while her granddaughter planted fresh roses in the front yard. Across the street, my father supervised repairs on the Henderson house, his color better, his smile returning. Your husband's painting saved us, Mrs. Rodriguez said, crushing the notice in her weathered hands. Art is stronger than greed, no? I watched Ryan through the studio window above, his silhouette bent over a canvas. Sometimes it just shows us what's worth fighting for. The morning paper lay on Mrs. Rodriguez's porch. Marcus Bennett's face splashed across the business section. The board had voted him out yesterday, though he'd managed to keep enough shares to stay wealthy. His empire had cracked but hadn't crumbled. Men like Marcus Bennett never truly fell. They just adapted. Grace appeared at the end of the street, waving a stack of documents. The last of the ownership transfers, she called out. The neighborhood association now controls most of the properties. And Marcus's shares? Divided between Emma and Ryan, Grace smiled. Though Ryan's talking about turning his portion into an arts foundation for local kids. I climbed the stairs to Ryan's studio, pausing in the doorway. The space had transformed since our confrontation with Marcus. His portraits of the neighborhood now shared walls with abstract pieces, explosions of color that seemed to capture both rage and healing. The gallery called again, I said, moving beside him. They want to show your work. Ryan didn't look up from his canvas. Did you know he came to see me yesterday? I stiffened. Marcus? He said he was proud of me, that it took real ruthlessness to destroy him like that. Ryan's brush stopped moving. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm more like him than I thought. The difference is what you build from the ruins. He turned, really looking at me for the first time since our wedding day. And us? What do we build? The question hung between us, heavy with possibility. Our marriage had started as a weapon, forged in revenge and manipulation. But somewhere between plotting and surviving, something real had taken root. I don't know, I admitted. But I'm willing to find out. A commotion outside drew us to the window. Emma Bennett stood on the sidewalk facing my parents. My mother hugged her, an unexpected peace treaty between families. My father shook her hand, then pointed to some architectural plans he'd been reviewing. She's helping fund the neighborhood restoration, Ryan explained. Says it's her way of making amends. And Marcus? Moved to the coast, says he needs time to reassess his priorities. Ryan's laugh held less bitterness than before. Mom's filing for divorce. I watched our families below, the unlikely alliance of Morgans and Bennetts, builders and artists, all working to restore what greed had nearly destroyed. The revenge I'd sought had transformed into something else, something that felt more like justice or maybe redemption. Your father called me yesterday too, I said quietly, asked why I really married you. Ryan's brush clattered to the floor. What did you tell him? The truth, that I married you to save my family. But that's not why I'm staying. He reached for my hand, paint-stained fingers intertwining with mine. Through the window, we could see the whole neighborhood, the community that had survived Marcus's ambition, stronger for having fought back. I started another series, Ryan said, leading me to a covered canvas in the corner, about what happens after revenge. He pulled back the sheet, revealing a work in progress. It showed two figures standing in the ruins of something broken, but around them, new growth emerged. Flowers pushing through concrete, vines reclaiming walls, life persisting despite everything. It's not finished, he apologized. Neither are we, I replied, squeezing his hand. Below, Mrs. Rodriguez's roses caught the morning light, their blooms defiant against the shadow of what we'd almost lost. My father's laugh carried up to us, strong and clear. Somewhere across the city, Marcus Bennett was plotting his next move. But for now, in this moment, we had won something more valuable than revenge. We had won the right to write our own story.